All right. Bryan, it's great to have you on the Bootcamp podcast.
Yeah, great to be here, man. Really amped with what you're doing with Boost Camp as well. So good stuff all around.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Just to set some quick context here, Bootcamp is it's an all-in-one lifting app for lifters to follow programs, create their own programs, or track workouts. A big part of our mission is to make science-based fitness more accessible. And we started this podcast really to reach all of our users on the platform and to really help educate people on all things fitness. So
It's awesome.
specifically related to the podcast we have today. So Bryan is a prolific hybrid athlete. It's really interesting because on Boost Camp, we primarily have focused on bodybuilding, powerlifting, power building, all things type of weight training related. But we do have a lot of users who have asked us for, what should they do cardio? Does cardio kill your gains? Um, and what type of running program I could do, in conjunction with lifting.
Yeah.
So I think this will be a very fruitful conversation with you, Bryan, to learn more about hybrid training, learn more about the cardio side of things, so that it's not all people who are spending all their time just lifting weights.
Yeah, for sure. No, I was one of those people that worried that cardio was going to kill my gains as well. But I've been through a number of iterations and experiences throughout my almost 27 years training
Wow.
now. And so I was like pure bodybuilding for a while, and then I was a competitive CrossFitter for a number of years.
Mm,
And then I went back into the pure hypertrophy world saying, I don't need this crazy cardio stuff. And then it all comes full circle. And a few years ago, when I turned 40, slightly before I turned 40, I started understanding the importance of cardio, started following people like Peter Attia, who is big into the longevity space. And what I love about him is that he also includes, the importance of hypertrophy and strength, which is my initial true love. And
mm,
so the last few years have been a cool experience in reintegrating cardio back into my training in a manner that doesn't kill gains, but also learning a lot along the way, making mistakes, improving on them, and kind of ending up at this place where I'm at now, where I feel pretty good with the ability to progress both at some level simultaneously, but more in a periodized manner.
yeah, I know from a different podcast that I listened to from you that you do half a year of more cardio type of training, and then you spend the other part of the year doing hypertrophy. How has that been working for you?
Yeah, that plan kind of came out of necessity when I made my initial blunder in this pursuit a couple years ago. So I thought my first year doing this that I could lift 5 days a week and do cardio 5 days a week and just eat a lot of food.
Mm,
And it didn't quite work that way. And I think it almost was as much psychological as it was physiological, in the sense that I just kind of fell out of love with lifting,
mm,
because I think I was just so tired. I was so tired of mentally having to be on with these activities that I was doing, 10 days, 10 times across the week. And cardio is quite time expensive as well. It's not lifting is much more time efficient, I think, than cardio is, or at least biking is, which was my preferred pursuit. And so through that experience, I realized that I'd be much better off if I spent half the year making hypertrophy or strength training my priority, and then half the year making cardio the priority, and then putting the other one on what would be maintenance dose. And we
mm.
know from the literature over the last number of years that what it takes to maintain either stimulus is significantly less than what it took to build it, to the tune of, some studies show 33%, some show even less. I tend to err on the side of 50%, because I think that as an advanced athlete, with the higher training age, it probably takes a little bit more to maintain, because you've built so much. Um, so I'll generally lift 5 times a week and cardio 2 to 3 times a week in the lifting season, and then reverse that, and I'll cardio 5 times a week and lift 2 to 3 times a week in the cardio season. And so far, I am 4 months into this cardio season, and it's the best I've felt at this point any of the years that I've kind of done this pursuit. It's now my third year. And I think I can say that I am progressing both, which is kind of wild. Last year, I definitely stopped progressing in weights, and I was just kind of like, okay, I'll do my best to maintain for the duration. But thus far, I've still been able to progress my weights, still been able to progress my cardio, and best of all, I've remained motivated for both of them, which was missing last year.
That's amazing. So what you're saying is basically to maintain your progress that you made in the on season for either cardio or weight training only requires a third of the effort. So then you're able to spend much more time on the main goal, during the on season, and then be able to progress both over a longer term horizon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like a model where you go up and then you don't even go back down. You just kind of like are able to almost sustain this higher level and kind of let the other adaptations then rise. So it's like a step model where the cardio goes up, then the cardio stays, then the weightlifting goes up, then the weightlifting stays, and progressively they each kind of get better. But because I'm still relatively newer to cardio, I'm still progressing that. I mean, significantly faster. I notice improvements still, every
Right.
couple months I'll be like, wow, I can't believe that I did that. Whereas in the weight room, it's like, man, I go 2 months and I'm like, yes, I got another rep on my hack squat, and literally it's like 2 months. I have to go through like this progression and then back my effort off and then build back up. And then I'm like, yes, all right, got a rep. I'm good.
Yep.
But that's something. And it's more than I was getting last year when I was trying to do both as hard as possible at the same time. I wasn't getting that rep. And so
Mhm.
it feels good it's such a weird reward system in lifting where you work so hard as an advanced athlete to get these marginal gains, but it almost makes it that much sweeter when you get it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you know how for people that are only into lifting, there's the type of power building philosophy, right? Where you're spending sort of like 50% of your energy on strength training on the compound lifts and then 50% on the bodybuilding side, so that I guess the hybrid sense of powerlifting and bodybuilding. Would you say the model for your type of hybrid training, with the cardio and the weight training side, it's better to go, fully, the half a year model that you currently have versus, let's say, when you said it didn't work before, you mentioned that you were trying to train 5 times a week in the
Mhm.
gym and then 5 times a week on the running. So trying to go, 100% simultaneously on both. But if you were to throttle that down to say going 50% on each, do you think you'll make less progress than going with this half a year model?
Yeah, it's a really good question and an interesting thought experiment. Um, I do believe that trying to do each one at 50% probably hinders the ultimate ability for you to get as quality results as quickly.
Mm,
Um, I think if we're just talking about health and you're just like, I want to be the healthiest person, I want to have muscle, I want to have strength, I want to have cardiovascular ability, and I want to do this for life, then I think that model is for sure a very practical way of approaching
mm.
it because you create a habit and routine. You don't have to think about it. You just know that each week, this is what you do because it's part of your habit. I think if you're looking at optimizing gains, then you do kind of have to choose one that becomes the priority. And you see this even in, strength and hypertrophy. Like at some point in your journey, you have to choose, do you care more about strength? Do you care more about hypertrophy? And the guys that are more successful in either of those pursuits do it in the periodized way. Like look at the way that Helms used to do his when he was powerlifting and he was bodybuilding. He would have seasons where he'd focus on powerlifting and seasons where he'd focus on bodybuilding. And what he realized was that even doing those powerlifting moves in the power building manner when he was doing his hypertrophy phase, it wasn't an efficient way for him to go. And that's why if you look at his hypertrophy training now, where he's all in on hypertrophy. He doesn't even include any of that strength stuff in there at all. He's not doing singles on the back squat before he jumps into his hypertrophy training for the day. And so I think at some point in every athlete's journey, if you care about optimization, you're going to have to separate them in some way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like with beginners, you can sort of do a bit of everything and still make
Mhm.
progress. But even for me, I would describe myself as an intermediate level powerlifter, probably a beginner bodybuilder. But even at my level, last year, when I was trying to really push on the progress, I found that I didn't even have energy to do my bodybuilding exercises because I was spending so much time, trying to progress my maximal strength. So I definitely understand what you're saying. As you evolve, as you get better, into your training, you sort of have to, pick your battles, and you can't really win
Mhm.
on everything.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that even goes into the order of which one do you do first. And
Mm,
so like if strength training is your goal, then you do your strength work and then you do your bodybuilding work and you understand that your bodybuilding work is going to suffer because it's second. You're having the same problem with your hybrid training if you're doing cardio and hypertrophy or strength or whatever it is. It's like, which one do you put first? Which one do you prioritize? And so at some point, like it's never 50-50. In some way, you're always making a decision in the moment of which one is more important. And I think one of the issues you could face if you're trying that 50-50 approach is if you don't have a priority, you could just be oscillating. And like one day you're like, I'll go run first and then do legs. And then the
yep.
next week when that leg workout comes up, you're like, oh, I'll do legs first and then run. And so you're seeing these performance decrements in whichever one is second. And so it changes your data too, and you can't actually interpret that data correctly.
Yeah, I love your approach too, where you're, taking half a year to focus on a, more singular goal versus trying to chase two birds at once.
Mm-hmm.
Because often, I mean, I even find that with my own training, where okay, like, oh, you're trying to build muscle, but you're cutting, and you're trying to get stronger, but you also want to look good. It's just
Yeah,
like very difficult to tackle so many goals that can be conflicting. Whereas if you really focus on one, as long as you keep a minimum effective dose on the other, you should be able to make really good, great progress as an intermediate lifter. I guess
absolutely.
Brian, just taking a big step back here, to what we're just talking about. Most of our audience, are lifters. So I want to start with like a explain like I'm five. What is hybrid training?
Yeah, hybrid training is really just mixing two pursuits that may be complementary or may not. I think depending on which type of pursuits you choose, they may be more complementary than others. Like running, I think is actually a somewhat difficult one with weightlifting because of the impact on the joints and the impact on the legs. So I think it has more of a mitigating impact on your leg training than something like biking would, which is concentric only in loading. So it's basically the concentric portion being the lifting portion. In biking, there's no negative, which is or like eccentric, where the muscle damage occurs. Sorry, I'm not letting you take your step back. So they are, yeah, one. It's basically combining two different pursuits that may or may not complement each other, and figuring out how to do that in a manner that either has the least contrary effects or can benefit each other in some way.
Hmm. When I think of hybrid training, I think of generally speaking, the two pursuits are lifting and running. Would you say that's like a good generalization?
I think in most cases that's probably how it's perceived by the public, but I do think that it doesn't have to be those two things. It could be sport specific. Like you could be a power lifter and a college basketball player or something like that. I mean, those are very odd ones because most basketball players are not going to be very strong. You could be a football player and a discus thrower or something like that, right? And so those are much more complementary because discus throwers train very similarly in the weight room to the way that a football player would train. But yeah, I think for the sake of this conversation, we could certainly just say it's cardio and weights.
Yeah, that makes sense. Uh, it's very interesting. Lifting is obviously very popular. But I would say, even recently, there's been, I mean, CrossFit has always been, very popular. You have these athletes in CrossFit who look fantastic, but are also incredibly agile athletic, can basically pick up any sport. Even I don't know if have you seen this show called Physical 100?
I've not, no.
It's like this Netflix show. It's like this Korean Netflix show where they pick like the 100 fittest people in Korea to do all these different types of competitions. It could be strength-based, cardio-based, endurance-based, but they're trying to find what they call like the most fit person.
Yep.
And the most fit person is always somebody who is good at a bunch of different things, including
Yep.
strength and cardio. You never see somebody who's just an amazing powerlifter, or amazing bodybuilder who wins.
Yep.
So I would say, even for most lifters like myself who primarily have lifting goals, I would say I am cardio curious, if that's the right term. So I
Yeah.
guess like is there a benefit to doing hybrid training for people that primarily lift?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. Yeah, great question and great framing. Um, so when you improve your ability to basically improve your VO2 max, improve mitochondrial function, which are going to be things that are associated with improved cardiovascular ability, you're going to find this benefit your lifting in so many different ways.
Hmm.
One is that your recovery is going to improve drastically. And this isn't just recovery. I don't know, however you think about recovery, there's two ways. You can think about recovery between sets and you can think about recovery between sessions. Um, and it will improve both. So imagine if before you were taking an hour to get through your session and a typical hour would consist of 10 work sets. That was how it was for me. Before I did my cardio, I would do 10 work sets in an hour. That would include warm up. So it's not like I was just doing one set every 6 minutes. Like it would include warm up sets, stuff like that. But I was resting 3 to 5 minutes between sets of, big compound movements, as I think most relatively strong people do on big compound lifts. Um, in theory, what I would say or hear from this cardiovascular crowd would be that now after you get in shape, you won't need to rest as long. And I was skeptical of that. But now that I'm actually there, I'm realizing that one of the best benefits of this is that you can either have shorter sessions with similar stimulus,
Hmm.
or you can actually fit more volume in to the time that you were training. So I could do maybe 15 working sets in that amount of time, or I could do the 10 that I was doing in 45 minutes. On top of that, you could actually handle more volume, which means you could probably benefit from more volume because you're recovering better. When you have a better cardiovascular ability, you actually are able to get your body into a parasympathetic state faster after a workout. So that feeling of like being overhyped on edge, sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight response, that lasts a lot longer if you don't have good cardiovascular ability because everything is challenging for you. It's like when you finish a heavy leg workout and you go to walk up the stairs, right? And you're just, not only do your legs fill with lactic acid and you're like, oh, my legs, but it's also like you're out of breath because you were just squatting hard and those sets were hard and you're fatigued. And then you walk up the stairs and you're like, oh, type thing. Like that puts you right back into the sympathetic state that you were in when you were lifting, but you're already supposed to be recovering because your session's over. If you're in better shape, then every little thing that you do throughout the day, it's moving the couch with your friends, it's walking from the parking lot to the grocery store, carrying your groceries home, whatever it is that you're doing taxes you less and therefore allows your body to be in this more parasympathetic, recoverable state all the time. So I think that from a lifter's perspective, that's probably like the really big, like pronounced benefits that you'll experience, relatively quickly.
Okay, that's really interesting. And for those who are watching, you're wearing a sweatshirt, but I recommend people check out your Instagram channel because you're not like a scrawny runner. Like you are in phenomenal shape. Like you actually like you're basically a bodybuilder. So you know what you're talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, I mean that's my background. Like I have a yeah, I mean I competed in men's physique in 2015 once. I'm not a competitive bodybuilder. I um yeah, I don't need that per se, but I am very much a hypertrophy enthusiast, and I train as hard as anybody else out there. I'm a big proponent of training to failure. Um, I use pretty low volumes, and I think that I've, had some really quality training programs and training partners throughout my life that have really pushed me and gotten the best out of me. But yeah, I mean, 100%. Like I can talk about cardio with so much passion, but I started lifting at 15 years old and I have not taken more than 10 days off in a row in
Wow.
literally 27 years. So yeah, a huge enthusiast of the hypertrophy world.
So, Brian, how do you recommend lifters start hybrid training? How do you recommend they incorporate cardio into their regimen?
Yeah, I think at first you just don't even need to worry about like zones or output or how hard you're working or anything like that. That's stuff that at this point in my journey, I'm very concerned with, making my easy workouts easy and my hard workouts hard. And like there's this whole rabbit hole of cardiovascular adaptations that you can go down. But when you're first getting started, I would just say that you just want to go out and move and do something that gets your heart rate up for 20 to 45 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week. Um, I would say that at least if we say 3 times a week, I would say two of those three you should err on the easier side.
Hmm.
Probably not as easy as walking, but you definitely shouldn't be panting for air or gasping for air. It should be at something that would be considered conversational level. And maybe those sessions are 45 minutes. And then maybe once a week you do something that's a little bit harder for 10 to 20 minutes, like some intervals, maybe like a one-to-one work to rest. So that's the one-to-one work to rest with about a 4-to-4 ratio is kind of this, it's called the Norwegian 4x4, and it's the most studied protocol to use for improving VO2 max really quickly. So
Wow.
you basically do 4 sets of 4 minutes with 4 minutes of rest in between. And the whole thing is 28 minutes, including the rest. So 16 minutes of work and 12 minutes of rest. And you just basically go as hard as you can for 4 minutes, not like 100% out the gate, because then the first minute is really hard and the next 3 minutes are awful and you feel like you're dying. It's more about going as hard as you can for 4 minutes, with the 4 minutes being the goal, not the feeling of death being the goal until the end. So that would be like, yeah, 4 minutes, go hard. Um, and that one I mean, any of them can really be done on any type of modality. Um, I find the long, slower ones to be difficult to do running because it's so much pounding on your joints. And also, people really struggle to go easy when they run. Like most people, especially lifters that come uh, straight from lifting without a cardio background, even running a 12-minute mile is going to put most people into the state of not being able to breathe. And so in that case, I generally recommend people bike or elliptical or stair stepper or something along those lines for the easy workouts. Whereas the hard one, I think running is great because running is so hard that 4 minutes of running, even at a moderate pace, is generally going to still get you there. But yeah, starting like that, two easy workouts, one hard workout. Um, Trying to keep the workouts as far away from leg days as possible would be a prudent move, especially the hard workout. So that like 4x4 or whatever it is that you do for your hard workout, keeping that at 2 days away from your leg day, a day and a half, something like that would probably be prudent. I don't really find a ton of impact on upper body training from doing cardio. But I guess it would depend on the type of cardio you do and what type of volume you're doing of either. So, yeah, I think that's kind of a pretty good get started package.
Okay. No, that sounds manageable. It doesn't sound too crazy. I've been doing something that's not as scientific and it's probably stupid. But I was like, oh, I should start doing some cardio. So what I've been doing is trying to get my mile time down to ultimately 6 minutes per mile.
Yep.
So I basically like calculate, okay, well, I go down one incline and I calculate, okay, how fast I got to run on the treadmill to break, 8 minutes today, to break 7:30, I finally broke like 7 minutes last week. But I'm
Nice.
basically going all out for 7 minutes.
Yeah.
And then I'm dead after. I
Yeah. So
feel like I'm
what,
dead.
and that, so that it really, what you're doing isn't dumb necessarily. It really depends on the volume that you're doing of that, right? So you can go hard or you can go long. With my protocol that I put out there, there's two easy workouts where you're not going to feel dead at the end. It's, it's like conversational pace. So what I'm promoting here is, hey, you should do, 90 minutes of easy stuff and then like 20 minutes of hard stuff.
Right.
You're basically just doing 21 minutes of hard stuff or 24 minutes of hard stuff, but you're not really doing the easy stuff if you did that 3 times a week. So that would be my question to you, is like, how often are you doing that?
That's only once a week, but it
Okay,
sounds like
yeah.
I
So you're doing
should.
7 minutes of hard stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it's fine. Like that's not going to have a huge mitigating impact on your lifting because
Hmm.
the dose is so low. Like you could probably even do that 3 times a week and your total dose would still be the same as my one hard session that I promote in my program. And then I'm sure you like walk around and you do some other easy stuff as well. So it's like you're still getting your easy and your hard, and at the end of the day, it's about the total amount of hard that you're doing. Like if you were telling me that you were doing that hard mile every single day, I'd be like, yeah, that's probably like not the smartest thing you could do.
Yeah.
And once a week is great, but you could probably optimize your results by
Yep.
doing it more than once a week. But I'm sure that it's completely miserable and it's probably mentally very taxing as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely going to take your approach going forward because I do feel like uh, when you're just starting out, you can just mess around and
Yeah.
anything sort of works. And for 8 minutes, you can push through anything. But I have felt like recently, okay, I'm hitting the wall now where I actually need to be smart about my cardio training in order to keep improving.
Yeah. I think in your case, if you were to do an 8 minute mile for each one of your 4x4s,
Mm,
that would be much more manageable from like a total effort and feeling like you're going to die. Like each 4 minute interval would still be hard, but you wouldn't be on the ground dying like you are at the end of your 1 7 minute mile. But you're also going to get a lot more volume at that higher dose. So now you're getting 16 minutes of volume at a high heart rate versus 7 minutes of volume at a high heart rate.
yeah, I see. That makes sense. And then what is the benefit of doing the two lighter sessions versus let's say slightly shorter but more intense type of session?
Yeah, they're just non-fatiguing.
Mm,
So when you look at zone two work, which is kind of what that idea is of being at conversational pace, it's kind of like this chic thing that's in now called zone two. And you generally will look at training in 5 training zones, where zone one is like walking or pretty easy, and zone five would be all out sprinting, like you're going to be on the ground panting, like you think you're going to die for 20 seconds at the end of your set. And then zone two is that great kind of low intensity effort where you can talk to your friends or to yourself, um, but not so easy that you could sing. That's like a nice distinction, is if you feel like you could sing, then you're going too easy. But if you feel like you could just talk, but it would be like slightly belabored, that's probably your sweet spot there.
mm,
And so the nice thing about that is if you stay below that cutoff point, which they call your lactate threshold, LT1, ventilatory threshold one. Basically, it's a point in your body where there's actually a change in the way that your body metabolizes or oxidizes fat and carbohydrate. And so if you stay below that point, it's much less fatiguing. It's almost non-fatiguing. Like you can't, it's not non-fatiguing, but it's so little fatigue that it's almost not anything you need to worry about. Like you can do a lot of volume there and not have it impact your other training. Whereas when you go above that threshold, and that's just that point where like now you're able to talk, but it's kind of like, I went to the mall with my friend, and you're talking, but you're like, I really shouldn't be talking type thing.
Yeah.
Now you're actually creating fatigue. You're starting to use a lot more glucose metabolism. You're delving into some of the same energy systems that we use when we do weight training. Whereas
Mm.
when you stay below that threshold, you're using completely different energy systems than weight training, to the point that they're almost non-competitive. And so what that does is it increases your base. So you think of your cardiovascular fitness almost like a pyramid, and the bigger you can make your base, then the pointier the tip can be. And so we really want to fill in that base at the bottom with all of this base zone 2 work, build up that, and then just fill in the gap at the top with like that 1 session a week of kind of really hard stuff, because the really hard stuff is actually going to compete with your weight training for the same resources.
Mm. That's really interesting. It almost reminds me more of powerlifting training, where you sort of have like days where you go lighter, that you
Mhm.
focus more on technique and volume.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, that's
I think
good.
most sports do a lot of that. I mean, if you look at across the majority of professional sports, and we could focus mostly on endurance sport. Like you look at rowers, runners, cross country skiers, bikers. Um, I'm sure there's more cardiovascular sports out there I'm missing, but all of them essentially follow somewhat like this 80-20 protocol, where 80% of the cardio they do is going to be low intensity and 20% of it being high intensity. And so even in my own training, of my 5 sessions that I do each week on cardio, at least 3 of them are that low intensity.
I see. I see. Interesting. Interesting. I love what you I love your description of like finding your zone two, with like
Yeah.
if you can still if you can sing, it's probably a little too chill, but if you can't,
Yeah.
it's almost like the RPE scale, for
For
cardio.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So RPE 5 is usually a good place to be for zone 2.
I see. I see. That makes
Yeah.
sense. That makes sense. So, I mean, it's really interesting, right? Like coming up from lifting culture, you see so many memes still that's been around for decades about how cardio kills your gains. You see memes of like a guy, with like the really dark face, doing cardio, or you see the meme of like I don't know if you've seen like the Olympic sprinter, with like a nice physique, but
Yep.
then you
Yep.
see like the long
The
distance runner.
marathoner. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Like, where does that misconception come from, and why does it still exist?
I think it probably comes from the idea that if you are in fact in a caloric deficit while you're doing cardio and weights, you likely will lose muscle. And that's sort of what I experienced at a small degree in the first year that I tried to combine these two together. Is I was still eating a ton of food, but I wasn't eating enough because my body weight was continuing to drop because the amount of cardio that I was doing was just so high. Um, but then I started thinking about it a little bit more critically. And like in my brain, I knew that it made sense that if I would just keep my calories up, like where would the muscle go? And so I started turning that over and talking to some other people in the industry. And we
Mm,
all kind of agreed. It's like if you're eating in a caloric maintenance state or even like a slight surplus, all cardio is doing is burning calories. It's not like cardio specifically is targeting your muscles and being like, because we're doing cardio, you are going to lose muscle. The reason you lose muscle is because cardio creates a caloric deficit and then you lose muscle. But if there is no caloric deficit, then the cardio is actually just improving your cardiovascular fitness. The weight training is still the stimulus for muscle protein synthesis and growth. And so the issue really is about caloric balance. And as long as you're making sure that your caloric balance is there, like it has to be higher because you're doing cardio. You have to account for the fact that you're doing
mm.
cardio. But if you do in fact do that, then the question I pose to people is, where is the muscle going to go?
Right. So you're saying basically, if you keep track of your body weight and it's not trending downwards, then it's highly unlikely that if you're still training hard in the gym, that you're going to be losing muscle.
yeah, where's it going to go?
Right.
Like your body weight's the same. Like it's not like you're just because you're doing cardio, your body's like, we're going to turn some of this muscle into fat because
Hmm.
yeah, you're doing cardio.
Yep. What about if you're on a calorie deficit? Let's say you're on a cutting cycle or you're doing a mini cut. How do you recommend concurrent training during that stage of the calorie intake?
Yeah, it's certainly tougher. It depends what your main goal is, right? Like if your main goal is to maintain muscle and it's not to improve cardiovascular adaptations, then I think you look at it kind of like that periodized approach, like I use with the splitting of the year up. You just say, hey, during this period of time, I'm going to be in a caloric deficit, so I need to be very cautious of how much cardio I'm doing, what intensity of cardio I'm doing, and where I'm placing that cardio. And so I do think that probably erring on the side of mostly zone two cardio is probably smarter when you're in a deficit because it's not going to compete for the same resources as your weightlifting.
Hmm.
And because you are going to be in an energy deficit, like literally you're going to have less energy, you need to save that energy both physically and mentally because when you're in a diet it's also hard to get motivated to even like go to the gym and work really hard sometimes.
Yeah.
So you need to save that mental capital for your weights and not putting it into sprint training, because that's not going to build muscle. It's just going to make you tired, to make it harder for you to save your muscle from being lost in the deficit. So that's the main thing I would say is just keep your cardiovascular work lower intensity, but cardiovascular work is a great tool to use in a deficit.
Oh yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of that. Like I think starting with steps and counting steps is a great first step. And then one of my favorite models to use from there is just look at your body weight. And if you stagnate in your body weight over the course of 2 weeks, then you can either increase the number of steps that you're doing or add 10 minutes to the amount of zone two cardio you're doing, or you can drop 100 calories. And so you kind of have a choice there of how you want to manipulate it. Like, do I want to drop food, or am I pretty happy with the amount of food that I'm eating? I don't want to give up 100 calories, but I do have an extra 10 minutes to add of zone two time. And so you can kind of manipulate that in a way that works for you, and makes the dieting process probably a little bit easier as well.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So sticking on the topic of diet and nutrition, how do you recommend somebody who's starting hybrid training adjust their diet and their macros?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't. I mean, I would adjust it, but I wouldn't overthink it too much. I would just take the amount of cardio that you're adding in and get an estimate of how many calories you're burning during that, and then just add that into your diet. As long as you're getting enough protein already, then I think bringing it in from mostly carbs is fine. If you want to do a mix of carbs and fat, that's fine too. I'm a huge proponent of just protein and calories being the things that matter. And I don't track or even have my clients track carbs and fat ever. I'm sure if you're going to stage, that's different, but I don't coach people to stage. And so for general daily life, like we're talking about less than 1% margins if you're going to try to be as nuanced as getting specific on your carb and fat grams. So I think if you're going out and you're like, okay, I'm going from zero cardio, I'm going to follow Bryan's plan. I'm going to do two 45-minute zone two sessions. I'm going to do one harder sprint work session. Let's assume we're talking about a 180-pound male. It's likely that during that zone two, they're probably going to burn 400 calories each time. So 800 total calories across the week. During their sprint training, they'll probably burn 300. So we're looking at 1,100 calories that they need to add to the week. That's not a ton of calories across 7 days. So I would just say, add 150 calories a day in carbs and fat, and you should be pretty good to go.
Okay. What is the biggest mistake somebody can make when they start hybrid training?
But yeah, probably doing the leg days too close to the hard cardiovascular effort. I think that's going to have cumulative negative impacts on both. But definitely on the leg training for sure. If you're doing the cardio before that, like the day before or something like that. Or I guess if you're doing the cardio after, then the leg training would negatively impact your cardio. It could also, the cardio could then also impact your recovery from the leg training. So it can kind of go both ways. That's certainly a big one. I think just trying to do too much cardio is probably a big one as well, because at least for us kind of personalities in this industry who really care about progress, which I think anyone listening to this podcast is probably progress oriented. They understand progressive overload. Um, Man, there's something amazing about getting newbie gains. And for someone who's been training with weights for a while, newbie gains are like a thing of the past. And when you start getting them again in the form of cardio, that can be quite addictive and you begin to covet it.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people, myself included, fell into that trap of the more the better, which is true in most cases.
If
Volume
you're a
is
beginner.
actually volume's even more correlated in cardiovascular work with progress than it is in weights. Like it is in weights as well, but in cardio, volume is very correlated with progress and adaptations. And so it's easy to fall into that trap. But when you fall into that trap of doing too much cardio, then it really begins to negatively affect your weight training. And so if you want to be a hybrid athlete, that means that you're good at both. And to be good at both, you can't go all in on one. So you do kind of have to rein that in. And in most cases, I think as the hybrid athlete, like you love both pursuits anyways. And so really quickly you'll realize that by doing all that cardio, that you're ameliorating a lot of the gains that you could be making in the gym, and they're not actually kind of benefiting each other, you know?
Mm. Gotcha. Okay. Well, Brian, those are super helpful tips for lifters who want to pursue hybrid training. Now,
Yeah, cool.
I want to get to some more personal questions with you, if that's
Of
cool.
course. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, what is your proudest accomplishment in fitness?
Ooh. Um, Man, that's a good question. I don't know if I've ever actually thought about that. My mind, like my gut reaction was to go to some CrossFit competitions back when I competed in CrossFit, because there's so much time and energy that goes into training for that. And I was training, man, CrossFit. When you talk about training volume, CrossFit is really up there. So we were training, 2 to 3 times a day, having like an Olympic lifting session and hypertrophy or strength session, and then 1 or 2 metabolic sessions each day. And so, yeah, I think going to competitions and being able to demonstrate all the hard work. I'm thinking of one workout specifically in like 2012. There was a workout that was kind of just tailor made for me. It was a 2,000-meter row followed by 50 pistol squats, where you do a one-legged squat on the left leg, then a one-legged squat on the right leg, back and forth,
Ooh.
and then 30 power cleans at 225 pounds. And I just manhandled that workout. I had like the best score on that workout in my whole gym of like 300 people. And so that felt really good. But yeah, I mean, it would be a series of things like that that just kind of show up and make you feel really good about yourself.
Hmm. Okay. Wow. 30 power cleans. That sounds that sounds insane.
At 225 at the end of all of that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
those were the stupid things we did back in the day, you know?
So is CrossFit like the ultimate form of hybrid training, or is it like different?
Yeah. Yeah, it's skill based though. Yes, it is very much hybrid training, but you have to be good at so many things. So it's a combination of powerlifting, Olympic lifting, um, cardiovascular work, like running, rowing, jump rope, biking, box jumps, things like that, as well as gymnastics. So you have to be able to do the rings and the bars and handstand push-ups and walk on your hands and all that stuff. And so it's a combination of, like, I think there was 5 different modalities kind of all thrown together.
Mhm.
And then they have in their competitions, they'll have some events that are pure strength, some events that are pure cardio, some events that are pure gymnastics, and then a bunch of events that are just like a mix of everything. And so you can't be a specialist. You have to be a generalist, but you have to be really good at everything without being the best at anything.
Right, right. Okay, no, that's cool. All right, here's another one. What is there a quote that you live by?
No, I, I, I don't think there's a quote that I live by. Um, man, no, I honestly, I don't have one that just kind of like resonates in my brain as something that I
Okay.
think about every day. A number of great quotes out there that have been meaningful, but yeah, nothing significant.
What I guess like when let's say you're at the toughest part of the workout, right? Where you want to give up or you're like, oh, maybe I just call it today. What kind of self talk do you have?
It's usually related to the sense of internal reward that I know I get once I complete it. And so we talk a lot, like in our society, we have a dopamine crisis. I read the book last year, Dopamine Nation, which kind of got me thinking about this, but
Mm,
we we go after these things that are immediate rewards for us. And then we get this dopamine rush and we feel really good. Like I'll eat the piece of chocolate or I'll do the drug or have the drink or whatever the thing is. Um, but it's the hard things that we do that actually really create more kind of this long lasting dopamine effect. Um, and I think
not the
that
cheap
do
dopamine.
what?
Not the cheap dopamine.
Right, not the cheap dopamine, the stuff that really is rewarding for you. And I think that um, doing hard things is really, I think, the thing that builds self-worth, self-efficacy, and gives you the dopamine response that I think we're all like truly craving. And so in those moments, it's that sense of accomplishment of being done and knowing how let down I will feel if I give up in that moment.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. I sometimes I think like let's say even when I'm doing the I started trying to break like the 8 minute mile,
Yep.
which is nothing, but near the last 2 minutes, I was like, okay, this is meant to be hard. This is meant to suck, and that helps me get through it. Versus if I just think, okay, this sucks, I gotta give up, then I probably just stop.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. You can definitely get in that kind of self-defeating mindset really easily. Um, and man, I've been there. Like I know that exact feeling you're talking about because there's this hill that I bike around here in Boulder. We have the mountains everywhere,
Yeah.
and so I'll go out and I'll do this one ride called Chapman, which is this like winding dirt fire road, but it goes up for it takes me a little over 20 minutes. There's not a moment of relief. Like usually on most rides, it's like, okay, I just need to get over this hill and then it will level out for like a minute and then it'll go up again. This one literally just goes up for 20 straight minutes. And so
Wow.
there's no relief. And so I know that feeling where like I'm like, oh my God, this hurts so bad. Like I really, 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 really want to stop. Okay, okay, I just got to keep going. There's like 3 more minutes. And that's you like running in the end of that 8 minute mile. But you don't stop because you know that you have goals and that you achieving your goals builds so much self-worth in your brain and it empowers you so much. And you
Yeah.
know how bad you would feel if you gave up on yourself in that moment as well.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, imagine that ride is way tougher than being on the treadmill because I mean, what are you supposed to do if you stop? You gotta turn your tail around and bike back down.
Yeah, or I mean, you just stop and you rest for like 2 minutes and then you keep going. I don't
Okay,
know,
that's fair.
but
That's fair.
but yeah, yeah. But I've never stopped. I've wanted to stop every time I've done it. I've done it 4 times and never have I stopped. It's just so painful in the moment.
Yeah. Okay, here's a question that's I'm always interested in hearing, and feel free to take your time on this. But what is the biggest bro science that you believe in? So it could be anything. It could be like a technique. It could be a
Yeah.
training philosophy that I would say maybe it's not proven yet by science, but you find it to be very important for
Yeah.
fitness.
It's almost a shame that we didn't ask this question in like 2020 before all the lengthened research came out, because I
Mm.
was experimenting with like lengthened partials and all that stuff like way before it became prominent in the
Oh,
industry like it
wow.
is now.
Yeah, everybody's talking
Um,
about it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Like it always just made sense to me with back movements specifically, uh, that it's so hard at the contracted point that you must be missing out on gains if you always force the bar to go to your chest on a pull down or on a row or something like that.
Mm,
And so I was doing like partial pull downs and partial.
mm,
Um, yeah, I think maybe like in that vein, maybe it's the use of a little bit of momentum. Like I've swung both ways on this, and so like when I first came out of CrossFit, well, when I first started training bodybuilding back when I was a teenager in early 20s, I always used a bit of momentum because I had an ego and I wanted to use heavier weights. In retrospect, what I realized is that I was primarily using momentum on movements that are short overloaded. And thus, by using momentum, you're actually able to get more out of the lengthened position because you're getting momentum into the short position so that it's not quite as hard as it would be otherwise, thus being able to get more out of the lengthened position. Um, and then I graduated out of CrossFit. I graduated. I stopped doing CrossFit and got back into hypertrophy, and I went the other way, and I went completely strict. I was like, I absolutely will not use a little, even teeny bit of momentum, and I'm even talking about like doing a bicep curl and letting my elbows come forward into shoulder flexion. I wouldn't even do that. Like I would pin my elbows where they are, and the moment that my arm could no longer curl that dumbbell or whatever it is with my elbow locked in place, that was failure. Um, and so I kind of swung the other way. And then more recently, I've swung back to the other side where it's not as much momentum as I was using in the early days, but I'm certainly allowing a little bit more to occur after I've failed strict. So I'll often fail strict and then get a couple more reps in, um, where I would usually do lengthened partials or something like that. Maybe on a lengthened movement, you can't do lengthened partials because, like, imagine doing I'm thinking of a face away curl with cables. Like it's lengthened overloaded. So if you fail, you can't actually do a partial because the hardest point of the position is the bottom.
mm.
Um, but if you use a little bit of momentum in that from there, you can get a
Right,
couple
get that
more
overload.
reps. And exactly, you allow a bit of shoulder flexion, allow the elbow to come forward a little bit, but there's still tension on the bicep as well.
Yeah.
Um, and so I've allowed myself to do more stuff like that. So momentum maybe is a little bro sciencey. I maybe another really good one is I have always just been such a huge fan of chest movements with a lot of abduction. So think flies, pec machine flies, cable crossover type movements, things where your elbows and your hands move like way away from your body and create that super gnarly stretch across the chest.
Mm,
And so since I've learned more about proper biomechanics of movement through Kasim Hansen at N1 and stuff like that, I understand that the pecs wrap around the rib cage and use kind of the rib cage as leverage. And so by putting the arms further out, it shouldn't, in theory, actually increase the tension on the chest. Like by the wrapping around the rib cage is where the chest would actually stretch, not by bringing the arm out further. But for whatever reason, those abducted chest movements are just they just do really well for me. And I feel like they always have. Even as a teenager, I remember dumbbell flies being just a huge, huge movement in my arsenal when I felt like my chest actually began to develop. So that would be maybe another one as well.
mm. That's really that one. That's really interesting because now I'm thinking about what you're saying about the different movements. When I do chest fly, I get a huge chest pump. Like I feel like there's so much blood and growth in my chest afterwards. Whereas
Yeah.
when I do like a bench press or even dumbbell press, I don't really feel that much blood flow in the chest. So I don't know if that has any correlation to anything, but it does seem like the flies do get I don't know, just a bigger pump.
Yeah. And I guess it depends what type of fly you're doing too. Like a dumbbell fly would be more lengthened overloaded. So I think there would be less pump compared to something like a cable fly where there's more of that even resistance profile and you can really get the squeeze at the contracted position.
Mhm.
Um, but it doesn't matter what kind of fly, like whether it's a lengthened overloaded dumbbell fly or a pec machine or a cable crossover, like any of those movements, like where there's a bunch of tension and the arms are kind of out wide, all of those seem to do really well for me.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, Brian. Well, that's all the questions I had. This has been super helpful to introduce lifters to hybrid training. I learned a lot about how I should actually be hybrid training properly, how I should be doing cardio properly, how lifters can incorporate cardio training 3 times a week, into their regular lifting, and why it's actually beneficial for work capacity and being able to lift with more volume. So this has been incredibly helpful. Where is the best place for people to find you, and how can people follow your training protocols?
Yeah, so I'm at Bryan Boorstein on Instagram. Just look up how to spell my name in the show notes. And and I own two companies that offer monthly subscription programming. So Evolved Training Systems is my original one. And we offer 4 times a week training programs for full gym or home gym. And then my other company has a lot more to offer. Paragon Training Methods. We offer 15 different programs, including Bryan's program, which is the program that I follow. I have two versions of Bryan's program now. One, which is what I actually do, which is I'm in cardio season now, so I'm only lifting 2 to 3 times a week. I'm doing a bunch of cardio. I put that program in the app, and then I also have uh, Bryan's optimal hypertrophy program, which is not what I'm doing right now, but is what I would be doing right now if I was focusing on lifting fully. And then we also offer a bunch of other programs, whether you have full gym, home gym, dumbbells only, and whether you want to train 3 days a week, 4 days a week, or 5 days a week for each of those types of equipment options.
Nice.
So much more thorough program offering through Paragon, and you can find both of those through my Instagram and stuff. So I really appreciate you having me on. This was super cool, and hopefully we get a chance to chat again here soon.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Brian.